people in ministry and missions, there's always a story and a journey that people have been on to get to where they are in ministry and missions. So I think from, at an early age, you felt the call into missions. So what made you consider, missions at an early age?
Yeah, it depends how you define early, but growing up, I would say I went to church for one reason only, and that was because my family after church would stop and get donuts on the way home. Okay? So I literally went to church because I had to. So that doesn't mean that in church I wasn't exposed to the concept of God or his nature and learned some of those things. But as far as wanting to know God or relate to God or think I could relate to God was really not on my radar. But it's when I actually was in high school. My mom started to become desperate, a lot of family issues, and she became desperate and started searching and different avenues. And one of those avenues was eventually to go to a Bible study, open the Bible, and learn about Jesus. And so that started to spill over into my life in high school. So just while I was beginning to discover Jesus, Emmanuel, God walking on earth, and knowing that I could relate to God. While I was going on that journey, that's the same time that you had all of these crises and wars in Southeast Asia. So you had all these refugees coming, people fleeing their country. You had them fleeing, the Hmong fleeing from Laos. You had the Vietnamese fleeing from Vietnam. You had the Cambodians fleeing from Cambodia. And so while I was in high school, it was that time where Southeast Asian refugees started to come to the United States. Mm-hmm. And so I was in high school in Minneapolis, and almost overnight, maybe there was some assembly or some information about it, but it seemed like almost overnight our school was filled with all of these new people from Southeast Asia, students, just there in our hallways.
And this was in Minneapolis?
This was in Minneapolis, yes.
Wow.
My friends, they started to tease them. Oh, look at, they have flip-flops on in the winter. What do they bring to lunch? It's so, smelly or whatever. And for me, there was something different happening inside me, although didn't even know what missions was. Okay, so I couldn't identify it as anything in that realm of Great Commission. But I had a sense of, no, I'm not going to tease them. They have a story to tell. They have a story, and I'm going to eat lunch with them. I started to have my lunch with these Southeast Asian refugee students. I started on my study hours, started a time of teaching them English. And so I started these relationships, and that's when it was kind of on my radar. I would go to a Hmong home, and I would literally see where they would offer up a chicken sacrifice based on their animistic religion. And I'm not talking about there, I'm talking about here in Minneapolis. And as a new believer, I'd go and I'd be reading my Bible, and I'd be reading in Hebrews about how there were priests who offered animal sacrifices in its time, but then that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was the ultimate sacrifice. So I'd start praying and say, well, God, who tells the Hmong people, who helps them understand that Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice? Or I'd go to a Cambodian's home and see the Buddhist statues and the idols set up and the incense and the offerings, and then begin to read in Psalms, that idols have eyes but they cannot see, they have ears but they cannot hear, mouths they cannot speak, and begin to ask sort of the same question, well, who tells the Cambodians that God's a living God? He breathes and hears and relates. And so I found very quickly that's a very dangerous question to ask God, who's going to tell them, because that's when I started to change inside where your podcast is called Mission Minded. That's where my mission mindedness began to stretch and be formed and shaped.